good morning, everyone, or good afternoon for those watching from Europe. So my name is Nicholas. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Neurosoft. And at Neurosoft, we have developed a platform technology to manufacture these extremely soft and implantable electrodes to monitor and treat severe neurological disorders. We are a spin-off, academic spin-off, classic spin-off from EPFL. It's the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne, in Switzerland. And we have been heavily accelerated by the V Center, which is another prominent neurotech foundation that is supporting startup companies in our field. And we're located in a very beautiful building, Campus Biotech in Geneva, Switzerland, which I'm happy to show you around if one day you come by. So at Neurosoft, what we're trying to do initially with our platform technology is to replace your conventional electrodes that are used to record or stimulate brain or spinal cord, even peripheral nerves, which are all made with these very rigid and large platinum discs that are typically hand wired into a very stiff and silicon substrate. And the problem with that is that, well, brain and spinal cord are very soft tissues. You can think of them like panna cotta or tofu. And of course, it's also a very dynamic system. The spinal cord is an obvious example, especially at the cervical level. We have huge mechanical stresses, but even the brain is constantly under micromotion due to blood flow, CSF flow, and breathing. And so our goal at Neurosoft is to develop technologies that can bridge this mechanical gap between these very soft and dynamic tissues with what's conventionally used as rigid electrodes. And so we have developed these extremely thin and soft stretchable electrodes. I have some here, so if you want to have a look, please let me know. So we spent multiple years at first in academia to develop these extremely stretchable electrodes. And even though you don't need to stretch that much in the body, you have some very unique properties that are extremely important for long-term biointegration, as well as accessing locations of the brain or spinal cord that you would otherwise not be able to. And so I'll give you a few examples. We are also able to integrate much smaller electrode sites. We have tried to automatize manufacturing of these devices using semiconductor-like industry manufacturing techniques instead of hand wiring. And we have a relatively large IP portfolio of 24 patents. 11 have been granted already in the US and Europe and a few in China. And we have been working a lot in preclinical animal models in different applications from mice, pigs, monkeys, spinal cord, brain. So we've done a lot of testing. And so Neurosoft's goal is really to bring these technologies to the clinic. And so as a startup company, we decided to focus on what we believe is our killer application for that technology, because we really want to develop a full solution leveraging our soft electrodes, even though we could also potentially foresee the use of selling just the electrodes for companies that would like to use them. But for now, we're really focusing on developing our own therapies. And so the main one that we're interested in is severe, so before I get there, just one word, we're manufacturing these electrodes ourselves in Campus Biotech in Geneva. So we've implemented a manufacturing line in a clean environment. So we keep all manufacturing in-house. It was because we're using very specialized manufacturing processes, and we're expecting an ISO certification hopefully soon by our notified body that did the audit early this year. So sorry for that. But basically what I was saying is we've decided to focus on one indication, which is severe tinnitus. So this is ringing sensation in the ears. This affects actually a very large portion of the population, around 10 to 15%, but we're really interested in the most severe cases, around 7 to 9 million people in the US and Europe who has this constantly. It's chronic, it's highly debilitating. It's unimaginable how much these patients suffer. They typically have severe depression, and around 500,000 of these patients attempt to commit suicide every year. An infamous case is Ken Taylor. He is the founder and CEO of Texas Roadhouse. He actually got severe tinnitus after catching COVID. Actually, COVID has been linked to an increase in tinnitus cases. And he had tinnitus very severely. His son describes it as a jet airplane taking off in your ears 24/7. He unfortunately committed suicide the last year. So this just gives you a very concrete example of how horrible this disorder can be, and also why you would even imagine to get an implant to try to solve this, because this is what we're doing. So unfortunately today there's no treatment. There's only management of tinnitus with hearing aids, headsets to try to mask the sound. And so today, people have been looking at the brain as a new route to try to treat tinnitus. And so some independent fMRI studies in the past few years have focalized on the brain regions, and they've been able to see that some brain regions seem to be hypersynchronized and hyperactive in these patients. One of these regions being near the auditory cortex in the cilium fissure, which is illustrated here on the bottom right. And so this is one route that some people are looking at to try to desynchronize these neurons. Some other groups, and actually 10 years ago, tried to go into the ciliary fissure with your conventional rigid electrodes. Actually, they use spinal cord implants, if you can imagine, to go into that fissure and to do neurostimulation. So that was pioneered by Professor Derrida, who is a leading expert in tinnitus, a neurosurgeon, who did this study in 43 patients, and he had very promising results. He had more than 80% responders and an average 50% reduction in the loudness perceived. And I talked to him, and actually he just joined our advisory board because the main problem, the reason he didn't continue, is that the electrodes were just not suited to go there. They were really too stiff. They could create contusions on the brain or creating compression. And the other problem is that the electrodes didn't have the ability to actually fold and get a good target with the tissues. And so this is where we come in, where we're trying to leverage our electrode technology to really go there safely by allowing to fold the electrode in the fissure, and also reducing the risk of cerebral hematomas or other effects that you would have with rigid electrodes. So this is kind of the surgical approach that we're looking at in human cadavers at the moment, where you basically fold your device into the fissure. And you can see on the CT scan and on the MRI here how nicely the electrodes can very nicely follow, in that case, the frontal and temporal lobe. So the white dots are the electrodes. And so this is something that we think is critical to have very good contact and avoid off-target stimulation. Another big importance of the softness, and this is much more generic than just for tinnitus, it's that typically when you implant electrodes, you have foreign body reaction with scar tissue forming around the electrode. And this obviously decreases the performance when you either record or stimulate. So what you see here is an explanted device from a monkey brain for your typical electrodes that you have on the market. And so what we've observed is that our electrodes have a much lower scar tissue formation, actually almost nothing. You have a very slight biofilm. This is a picture of a device explanted after 6 months from a pig brain, and you can see almost nothing. And we believe the key here is we're matching the mechanical properties of the dura mater, and we know that neurons are sensitive to the mechanical environment, and we think this is why we have such good results. And so we believe this is really the key to getting these devices to work long-term inside the body. So this is really, in the end, leveraging our electrodes from a safety perspective, but also surgical access, in addition to being able to integrate very small electrode sites to stimulate that region. So this is kind of very early stage project with tinnitus. We're still designing the system with our advisors, but our goal is to do a first proof of concept for less than 30 days using the first version of our electrodes, which is the ones we're actually been developing for the past 3 years now, which are intended to be used for up to 30 days. And as you probably know, there's a very nice use case for electrodes for the brain for up to 30 days, which is what we call subdural electrodes that are typically used for brain tumor surgery monitoring, or for epilepsy resection surgery, where you use the electrodes to localize invasively where the seizure comes from. So this is why we decided to go into that direction. It's a very nice US-friendly regulatory pathway, and it's a good way for us to get into the market, but also to have a device approved that we can then use off-label to test tinnitus in a subchronic setting. So even there, we provide benefits, MRI compatibility, the fact that we're using very thin films of metals. We have no artifacts around the electrode, so you can really image the brain. We can also reduce, we believe, complications, typically subdural hematomas, and also provide access to sulci, which sometimes it's interesting for insular epilepsy, for example. The other thing we're working on, but this is still on the R&D side, and we're submitting a patent soon, is to try to avoid large craniotomies and to leverage the electrodes that are very, very soft and flexible to basically fold them and unfold them through smaller burr holes, so you can cover large regions of the brain without needing such an invasive surgical approach. So overall, this is kind of a family of devices that we're developing for this first version. These are 3 examples. The idea is we can also personalize them depending on the needs for the patient. And we also know there's a smaller but still existing market for selling these electrodes for clinical research, where people like playing around with new types of designs and trying to find new therapies. So this is also a good way to enter that market with the same device. So we're still working on these electrodes. We expect our first human studies towards the end of this year with this less than 30 days implantation. And we expect FDA clearance next year with a very nice 510(k) route, as this is considered a class 2 medical device for this less than 30-day indication. Our goal is really to leverage our electrodes to enable full access to the brain cortex. A large part of it is in the sulci. And so tinnitus for us is, we believe, the biggest market and where there's more interest. But of course, there's other parts of the brain that you can access only from the sulci that might be interesting for other indications in the future. So far, we're a relatively small team of 8 people, mostly engineers with a lot of experience in neurotechnology. And then we have a great advisory board spanning all expertise from really tinnitus to soft electrodes to medtech manufacturing, as well as to hardcore hardware for neuromodulation IPGs with Claude Clément, who was the former CTO of the V Center. So a few words, we recently actually secured $3 million in non-dilutive funding mostly. And so that's how we've been working so far. So we're very, very lucky to kind of get started with very free money at the beginning to the university and to other grants. And now we're currently raising our first equity round of $12 million. And we're extremely interested in looking into the US. And this is also why I'm here, as this is our primary markets for both our products. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'll be happy to talk to you also over lunch.
Thank you, Nicholas. Okay, we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Jeremy, do you see anyone from the Zoom world with their hand raised?
I don't.
I don't
I have a
either.
question.
We have a question from a live human. Chad, go ahead. You're
Speakers over here.
Yeah, they can hear you.
My question comes to the trial. Is that a reimbursed pathway in the US yet? Do you know?
For the tinnitus?
Yeah.
No, we don't think so. I mean, so that's one thing we're working a lot on, is trying to understand the reimbursement pathway for a neuromodulation device for tinnitus. Already tinnitus, there's no therapies for now, so it's a challenging kind of pathway. But we're looking into it. We know, however, there's been some studies where people have been asked how much they're willing to pay. So we believe that to kind of for this value of death before reimbursement, we believe that some patients will be willing to pay out of pocket, which we believe it could be a nice way to bridge that gap. So I don't remember the numbers, but some patients are willing to pay more than $50K out of pocket to treat tinnitus.
Wow.
So that's one strategy.
I have a follow-up question on that. As you mentioned,
Yeah.
and as I think most of us know, there's really no effective treatment for
Yeah.
people with severe tinnitus. Have you done any surveys or studies to assess the willingness of patients to undergo an invasive procedure to treat this? What percentage
Yeah.
of that target market do you think is willing?
That was the first question, because for us, 2 years ago, I discarded tinnitus for exactly that reason, but I was wrong. So the first thing we did is look at surveys that already exist. And usually 20% of patients would say they would willing to go.
20%?
20% of the severe cases.
Got it.
Then you have the other extreme, which is another way of estimating it, is who is committing suicide.
Yes.
So someone told me very abruptly, if you're willing to put a bullet in your head, try with an implant first. So that's around 7%. And then the third thing is we actually work with Jennifer French, where she worked with patient associations to try to understand the need. And we were quite sure that there is a market that is very large, even if we consider, I think we estimated to $3 billion market, even if we consider only 10% of severe patients willing to get implantation.
Okay. Yes,
Sure.
go ahead.
No, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
Presentation. Thank you. It seems as though your technology, your electrodes are enabling for at least tinnitus, because it can't be done without your electrodes.
Yeah.
But don't you think that there might be opportunities to just use your electrodes for a whole lot of other applications?
Yes.
What does that represent for you as a potential? Could that be half the company? I mean, to go in to work with Medtronic Boston,
Yeah.
with using your electrodes to replace their clunky,
Exactly. No, for us, the strategy was to demonstrate that it works for our products. And we believe that's going to be important to create confidence in our technology. And so, for example, we've talked to companies like Neuropace who are interested, but they say, okay, let's show me that it works. And then we can discuss using your electrodes. So for us, it seems that even if you want to go to that path, we need to demonstrate that it works. And this is why we decided to focus on 1 or 2 products standalone that we can develop to show that the technology works. And we believe that's important to actually convince other partners to use our electrodes. I think it's going to be very, very hard for companies that already have so much clinical risk to take an additional technological risk on the electrodes. So that's kind of the logic. But now in terms of percentage, it's hard to say. I think we're very open to partnerships with whoever is willing. And if maybe some people are willing to take more risk early on, of course, we're open to that.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Nicholas.